So words cannot express how excited I am about this evening, to have the opportunity to have a fireside chat with the one, the only Sam Zell, who's been a great friend and a mentor, someone that I know I can always go to as a sounding board in my time at Michigan and Ross. For those that don't know Sam's background, both an undergraduate degree and a law degree from Michigan, so he's a double header at Michigan, which we always love the folks who collect Michigan degrees. It's ingrained. Started your career in the 60s in real estate, buying distressed properties mostly and fixing them up, and went on from there to basically invest in pretty much every sector of real estate one could imagine, as well as technology, media, and a whole range of other industries, and has been certainly one of the most successful business people in the world, and one of our most esteemed and illustrious alumni, certainly from the University of Michigan. Sam, it's an honor to have you here this evening. He's also a published author. Has anybody read his book? It's one of my favorites. You want it signed, I believe. One of my favorite book titles of all time. Am I Being Too Subtle? And if you haven't had a chance to read the book, I highly recommend it. Sam has been a huge supporter of our entrepreneurship initiatives and programs. The Zell Lurie Institute at the Michigan Ross School of Business has really elevated the impact of entrepreneurship, not only at the University of Michigan, but since his investment in the Zell Lurie Institute, and even before that, the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Southeast Michigan and throughout the Midwest has grown as a result of his contributions. Now, each year we're third, fourth, fifth in the country in entrepreneurship, in the middle of the country, and that's pretty impressive. So tonight we're going to talk about a range of things. We're actually going to start. One of my favorite sayings that I've heard Sam say a number of times, in particular to our students, as well as our alumni actually, is anything is possible. Anything is possible. And the first chapter of his book is called The Impossible Life. And one of the threads that runs through a lot of Sam's writings and work is what your experiences have been growing up as the son of an immigrant, and your parents' story, and this impossible life. The first chapter of his book is called The Impossible Life. Can you tell that story and how that evolved to this belief that anything is possible?
I was born 90 days after my parents came to this country. So my parents landed in Seattle May 18th, 1941, and I was born September 28th, 1941. Maybe the best way to exemplify that impossible life, etc., is the fact that the ship docked in Seattle at 6 a.m. and at 6 p.m. my parents went to their first English class, which is indicative of the immigrant. And I dedicated the book to the immigrant. And more than anything else, I grew up in a household where my father and mother constantly reassured me or told me that this is America, this is where the streets are paved with gold, and that gold is not what you pick up, it's the opportunity to pick it up. That's what America really is all about. And therefore, I grew up in an environment where I didn't know that anything wasn't possible. And so and over the years, people would come and they'd, come and have lunch with me or whatever, and they'd say, geez, how did you do that? And I basically answered that I didn't know I couldn't. And if you don't know you can't, then there are no limitations. And so in the same manner as we became the largest real estate player in the world at one point. At one point in 1980, we didn't like the commercial real estate business. And my partner and I sat down and talked about it and said, well, what are the criteria, that makes for a good real estate deal? And I said, what are the criteria for a good business deal? Market share, all of the issues are the same. And so we said, let's spend the next 10 years bringing ourselves to a position where we're 50% real estate and 50% non-real estate. And we did that and more. So we adapted to a lot of challenges, but it's all about the fact that anything and everything is possible in this environment. And we need to recognize that.
Yeah. And how have you, over the course of your career, in the early days, more recently, instilled that perspective, that worldview that anything is possible in others? Because you may have it, but how do you get other people to see?
I think that maybe the best answer to that question is there is no better opportunity than to lead by example. And I have been the leader of, this is give or take 50 years since I started doing this, since I graduated from law school. Mm-hmm. And more than anything else, I've set the example. And I've set the example by, taking on new challenges, climbing new mountains, maybe starting with a rope, pulling somebody up behind me. But then, they found they could do it, and my job is to be the cheerleader. And today, at this point in my career, I spend my whole day sitting there and getting pitched by my people, and with ideas and challenges. And my job is to, refine their ideas and reorient them and challenge them to take it the next step.
Yeah. I've met a number of your employees, and a number of them are Michigan graduates. And one of the things that's universal when they talk about what it's like to work with and for Sam is it's not always easy. You will challenge them, but they know that you believe in them. And there's something about how you've cultivated a culture.
Well, you don't, obviously this is a little cliche-ish, but you don't kill the messenger. The answer is that, as I say to my people all the time, take me on. I'm not afraid to defend my position. Neither should you. And so you got to take me on if you think I'm wrong. And nobody is quicker to acknowledge that they're wrong than I am. Because ultimately the environment that I create is a one of access, is a one of not negotiation, but interface among people. We have a very unusual environment in that we've only had one person recruited at a senior level away in 50 years.
Wow.
One. And he came back.
That was going to be my question, is what happened to that person?
He came back after less than 6 months. So when he came back, I sat down with him and I said, Richard, I don't understand. You got a much bigger title. You got paid significantly more. Why did you come back? And he said, it's very simple. He said, I sat at my desk, and if I had a problem, and I was here, I'd get up, and I'd walk into your office and say, here's the problem, what do we do? I said, he said, in my new job, I write a memo. And then I wait 2 weeks for somebody to respond to me. He said, that isn't fun. And I think that, there's been a historical perspective that, fun is a very, very important part of success. And, many years ago, I was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal. This is like 1985, and I managed in the first 20 years of my career to stay under a rock. And then I ended up starting to get involved in public companies. So this person was interviewing me, and I said, that our corporate philosophy was, if it ain't fun, we don't do it. And the next day, this interview took place in Paris, and I got home the next day and I walked into the office and there were the office boys wearing t-shirts that said, if it ain't fun, we don't do it. But that's, there never was a question. None of these kids said, geez, we'll see them get upset. In the same manner as I've had the same office for 33 years. And about 4 years ago, I discovered that there was a door on the office. And I never knew, I never really looked at it, but I never knew there was a door because there's never been, my door is not closed. So I'm accessible to everybody. And when I interview somebody as a potential new employee, one of the things that I tell them is that one of the problems is that if you work here, you're never going to want to work anywhere else. And and I never really thought it through, except that we can't get rid of anybody. But it's like your reference where you said you've talked to some of my people, and their reference is, oh well, working for Sam is this, or not working for Mr. Zell, or not any overdone state. It's like we went casual as an office in 1969. With any idea what it was like in 1969? I mean, the basic premise was that if you dressed funny, but if you were really good at what you did, then you were eccentric. If you dressed funny and you weren't very good at what you did, you were a schmuck. So we were, when we talk about motivation, we talk about motivating our people. And you motivate them by creating an environment where they can excel. And yet they also aren't obligated to artificial standards. Like, is somebody smarter because they wear a tie? I don't think so. And the result is, we have funny things happened over the years. One of the funniest things that ever happened was I had a partner who unfortunately died, but he wore the same work boots, the same jeans. He went to Michigan, by the way, and the same plaid sweater, that's shirt, every day to work. And one day, the chief investment officer of CalPERS was in, California Public Employee Retirement System, which I think is the largest investor in the world. And Lurie, my partner, walked by, and she looked at him and said, would you mind getting me a cup of coffee? And he did.
And he said, yes, exactly.
Sure. And it was only later that she figured out who it was. But that's part of creating a culture.
That's right.
And creating an environment where everybody is connected. I mean, and that creates a sense of loyalty that ultimately emanates and results in experiences and exponential performance.
Yeah. Let me come back to you don't kill the messenger. Nobody's always right. Nobody's always wrong. You've taken a lot of risks in your own career with the investments that you've made. You're a self-described contrarian, right? You've been noted as someone who runs towards the fire, not away from it, and finds opportunity in that fire. How do you think about risk? And how does that shape which investments you find interesting and attractive, and which investments you actually do run from? How do you think about risk, and how does that shape what you invest in?
Well, I think that first of all, I think that we start with an enormous respect for the risk of execution. I can't tell you how many times, it's like I have a watch here. If my watch has one moving part, then it has a very small probability of not working.
Right.
If my watch had 50 moving parts, then there would be another 49 potential reasons why it didn't work. In the same manner, when somebody comes to me and they say, wow, we have this great opportunity, we're going to do this and we'll sell this and then we'll buy this. And I look at him and I just look at him and I say, that represents, enormous risk. That what happens if you get into the third step and it doesn't work? Where do you go from there? So I think what it is you're attempting to do is critically important. I think that I've always looked at risk, kind of if you take a quote from Bernard Baruch. Bernard Baruch was a financier who sold out before the Depression in 1929. And his famous quote was, "Nobody ever went broke taking a profit." In the same manner, when I look at risk, I don't worry a lot about it being too good. That it'll overwhelm me with riches. The problem is always, what's the downside? And if you can control the downside, you can control risk. So in the book, I talk about a deal where before we did it, we did an elaborate analysis, and the question that I put to my people was, how much risk are we taking? Here's the price we're paying. Let's do a fire sale analysis of the opportunity. And we did. And they came back and they said, you're taking $50 million worth of risk. And then all kinds of terrible things happened. There were fires and this in California. There were fires, race riots, and earthquakes, and we almost went under. And at the last minute, we sold the company, and we lost $50 million. Well, losing $50 million was not fun. But from my perspective, as an investment, it was very effective because we had correctly assessed the risk. If during your career you correctly assess the risk, then the likelihood of you excelling is very high. In my career, there have been lots of skeletons along the way, and they have generally been people who have taken unrelated, in other words, where no cap. In other words, just open, sign the loan.
Yeah. Or they're even
the
unaware
11th
of
commandment, thou shalt not sign personally. That's a very important part of staying alive.
Mm-hmm. And give us an example of a risk that maybe you miscalculated and why.
Well, obviously the most public example of that is the Tribune. We bought the Tribune. We committed to buy it in the middle of 2007. We closed it at the end of 2007. We were, I thought, pretty realistic about it. We basically looked at the assets, and we did the equivalent of an asset take-apart process, and concluded that if we could get there, that there was an enormous opportunity to unbuckle and unplug all the different pieces. We were realistic that the newspaper business wasn't terrific. And as a matter of fact, we underwrote the newspaper business to a 6% yearly suppression in revenue. So we assumed that revenue would be 6% less going forward. And it still worked, and it was very, very attractive return. And the structure helped. And then we closed, and in the first month, revenue was down 30%. It was
Didn't see that coming.
Well, it just, that's like stepping into an elevator shaft, and once the elevator is no longer has a cable attached, it just keeps falling.
Fair enough.
It was a pretty terrible experience, and the answer is we lost a lot of money, and the answer is we've also made a lot of money and other things. So the answer is that you have to be prepared and understand that nobody is right all the time. And as a matter of fact, to play baseball, you get paid $25, $30 million a year for being right 1 out of 3 times.
Yeah, you get in the Hall of Fame for that, actually.
You may get the Hall of Fame. You could hit 333. I only want to be right 70% of the time. The real key is how wrong are you on the 30?
That's right.
And as long as the risk you undertake is appropriate to what you can handle, it works. It's the guys who take unlimited risk.
With 70%.
Yeah, they got the other way.
That's right. So I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and then I invite your questions and write them down. Wendy and our team's running around here. You can give it to anyone, and they'll get them to me. But your comment about execution risk, I was reflecting as you were talking, explains my first meeting with you when I became dean. So I don't know if you remember this, but I came to your office, and we had lunch. And we spent about an hour and a half together. And when I told people afterwards that we spent about an hour and a half together, they were like, well, something went right there, because that's pretty atypical at least based on their experience. But we've got pretty bold ideas for what we're doing at the business school. And I lay out this grand, bold vision for what we're going to do at the business school over the 5 years of my first tenure as dean. And your response, I'll never forget, was, "It sounds very exciting. I'll wait and see." And that explains everything. You were assessing the execution risk on what we were going to try and do.
I mean, academics are famous for grandiose plans and limited execution. Am I being too subtle?
You're not being too subtle, because we're executing. No, that's exciting. All right, so let me, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll turn to the cards and keep them coming. Mark Perot, who is one of our alumni, who you just promoted to CEO of one of your companies, if I understand correctly. So congratulations to Mark. Very exciting for him. So he told me a story last year about an experience he had with you that I thought told a lot about who you are as a person, how you think about relationships, and the principles and values that underpin how you engage in business. And correct me on any of the parts of the story that I may not have correct. So you're negotiating a deal with one of your partners about an investment. You're not there. He and the team is there. And you send them off to go finish this deal, I think probably with the bank or the lender that's giving the loan. And they come back, and your question to them, and I don't know what the business was that you were investing in, but the question that you asked, according to Mark, was, did we leave any money on the table? And to me, that's a really interesting question, because most people would think that in that moment, you're asking that question to see, did we get all the value we could extract from that deal? But that's not actually what you're asking. You wanted to leave some money on the table.
Well, I think that
Why?
I think that the philosophy is probably most simply put as follows, and that is that the best deals are the deals where the negotiators have reached a point of indifference where they would take either side of the transaction. And so the name of the game is not to kill your opponent. The name of the game is to jointly reach a solution that's mutually beneficial. I mean, one of the funnier, I think I covered this in the book, but I've had a number of stories like this where we were selling some, I think, convertible debt, I think, for one of our companies about 20 years ago. And Merrill Lynch was the agent for it, and we schlepped around the country and we collected all the orders, and then we went to New York for the quote big meeting with with the underwriter, and everybody sat around this table, and there was a lot of formality. And the guy from Merrill Lynch said, "We are prepared to buy your offering at 6.5%, which was the rate." And I looked at him and I said, "Does that mean you would do it at 6 3/4?" And he said, don't think you heard me. I said, we would be prepared to buy it at 6.5. I said, so therefore you would be happy to buy it at 6.75. He said, no. He says, 6.5. I said, no. I said, the extra quarter of a point cost me almost nothing, maybe $1 million on a $150 million transaction. But I'm a consumer of capital, and I'm going to be continuing back at the trough many, many times in the future. And for $1 million, I can make everybody who bought this offering happy tomorrow morning. Risk reward, how much did I risk to gain a reward that meant that in the future when I went to the capital markets for money, we had unlimited availability because the word was that, quote, we left something on the table. And believe me, nobody is better at representing myself, and I leave something on the table because ultimately I want to re-engage. I mean, many years ago, and actually this was in Michigan, I went to buy a shopping center in Adrian, Michigan. And I went there, and I had heard about this guy, and I heard he was difficult. And I said hello, and he said hello, and he said, I want you to know nobody has ever done a second deal with me. This was before he said, how are you? I mean, and of course I said, well, at least to myself, I said, that's because he's never done business with me. I'm, a great deal maker, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I did the deal with him, and I was sure nobody would ever do another deal with him, least of all me. But that's the same principle. It's the same principle of leaving something on the table. It isn't leaving something on the table. It's, quote, negotiating in a manner to achieve a result where both sides have a very positive response to the opportunity. Yeah. That's what it's really all about.
Yeah. And understanding the long-term value of that relationship.
Yeah, well, but this is, unfortunately, the world we live in isn't anywhere near as long-term as it ought to be. I think that a great deal of my financial success is directly related to the fact that we've been long-term players, and we've, been through pluses and minuses and difficult times, but our perspectives have always been long-term solutions, not short-term scenarios.
So speaking of investing and thinking long-term, I'm going to combine two of these questions, but I'll read both of them. One of your songs, I'm reading verbatim, one of your songs is, when people go right, I look left. So the question, how do you know to look left, and how do you get the confidence to pull the trigger? But I'm going to combine that with another, which is looking forward in the real estate market broadly. What do you see as attractive is the question. And I'll layer on top of that, in real estate, if everybody is looking this way, what is to the other direction?
Well,
and how do you know?
Yeah, first of all, we're all either business students or proposed business students, and the world that we live in is one of market share and margins and profitability and things like that. My philosophy is kind of very simple, and that is that I've been on the Forbes 400, I think, since it started. And if you look at the list of people on the Forbes 400 and you eliminate the people who inherited the money, everybody else went left when conventional wisdom said go right. So Fred Smith was a kid at Harvard, and he'd inherited $14 million, and he'd written his doctorate thesis on a concept called Federal Express. And he invested $7 million and got the company started. And then the guys who managed it went back to him for the second $7 million. And he got to find out how much he really believed and how much he wasn't paying attention to all the people who said, interesting idea, but it'll never work. And the rest is history. But there are many, many examples of people having the confidence and the belief in whatever direction they were going to take the necessary steps. There are very few examples of high margin businesses or high margin activities that are done by everybody. Because if they were done by everybody, they wouldn't be high margin. And that's something that's so inherently simple to understand, and yet, it's like somebody trying to make a fortune in a commodity business. There's a reason it's called a commodity, because it is access to everybody. And ultimately, everything comes down to understanding that, I look at, this concept of competition, and I think it's really terrific, particularly for you. Me, I would like a monopoly. And if I couldn't have a monopoly, I would certainly try and be as close to an oligopoly as I could. In the same manner, when you talk about being a contrarian, and I've been accused of that, it's really an understanding of the fact that if everybody can do it, then there's nothing pretty unique about it. And consequently, you're not likely to be able to develop it from a margin point of view. When it's unique, and when you have, I tell you a story, a guy came into my office in, I think it was 2000, roughly, and I don't even remember why this guy came to see me, but somebody had sent him to me. And he explained that he had been in the pharmaceutical business, and he had been a big student of the FDA, Federal Drug Administration. And he said when the FDA was created in 1936, they had a problem which was called grandfathering. And what do you do with drugs that are already on the market? And in 1936, the number one drug on the market was aspirin. And the number two drug was something called guaiacifin, which is an expectorant like Robitussin. And when they did the FDA law, they basically said that if anybody took one of the grandfathered drugs and did an efficacy of another usage of it, that they would get a monopoly. And I was intrigued because, one, I really wasn't taking any risk on the drug, because the drug had been around for 100 years and grandfathered under the FDA. And the concept was to create long-lasting guaiacifin that would be distributed during the course of a day rather than in one shot. And I knew that there were other products that would have the same technology, so it seemed like a reasonable risk to take. It turned out that we ended up spending almost twice as much getting FDA approval, but ultimately we did. And the day after we got approval, we got a monopoly. And all of the similar products had to be taken off the shelves. And that product ultimately is probably, you're familiar with it, it's called Mucinex. And and we eventually made a fortune. But it was all about, this guy had been pounding on people's doors for years, trying to find somebody who would finance the clinical trials to prove efficacy of something that was already efficacious. That's even a word, I don't know. But the point was that, we sat there and made an analysis of the risk and the potential reward, and the risk was minimal compared to the scale of the reward. As far as the real estate business is concerned, I would suggest that at the moment, it's a little bit maybe more than fully priced. We've been a seller for the past 4 or 5 years. I'm a great believer that any day you're not selling, you're buying, and vice versa. And so consequently, we have been net sellers, and matter of fact, are sitting right now with $3.5 billion in cash in one of our companies, having liquidated an enormous amount of real estate over the last 5 years from that company, because we basically looked at what the pricing was relative to what we thought the opportunity was, and we're able to make that kind of a distinction. So I wouldn't think that the real estate business today is terrific, but I think that, you know, if you look at the history of commercial real estate since World War II, every single recession started with oversupply of real estate. The only exception was the Great Recession of 2007. That's the only time since World War II where real estate was not in oversupply. The Great Recession occurred, and then for almost 5 years, we built almost nothing in terms of new commercial construction. And then we began, and now, you know, we're now building the same number of multifamilies as we did in 1971, which was one of the all-time highs. We have a similar situation in office space, and so I think we're likely to see a softening of the commercial real estate market as supply begins to impact overall returns.
Yeah, some of the big players have noted they've already started to see that.
Yeah. So depending on the location.
And location, yeah. So speaking of location and real estate, is Amazon coming to Chicago?
Boy, I think that if Illinois and Chicago didn't have the problems that we have financially, there is no place in the country that is a better fit for Amazon. International airport, enormous supply of talent, cheap housing, absolutely perfect from every respect except that we're broke. And so is the state. And I can't imagine that Amazon would, no matter what kind of a deal they got, would be willing to undertake the potential cost of paying for past excesses.
Yeah, being broke didn't stop New Jersey from offering them billions in incentives. I don't know how they were going to pay that.
I promise you that Illinois had offered them billions too, and it has no way to pay it. Listen, Wisconsin just gave Foxconn $3 billion to move their plant to Racine, and Wisconsin doesn't have that much money either.
That's right. That's right. One last question, and then I know you've got another commitment that you've got to get off to. We've got recent alumni. I'm sure our current students will watch this on video. We've got a lot of prospective students here. If you were in your 20s and starting your career now, what advice would you give yourself? What advice would you give these folks as they look upon starting their career looking forward?
Well, I think I would probably want to answer that first by saying that, over the years I probably average, 20 campus kind of speeches for the last 25 years. And almost every one of them has ended up with some young male or female at the back of the room raising their hand and saying, when you started, it was really easy, but now it's really tough to do.
Right.
And I guess my answer to them each time was that I thought that it was all about, willingness to, quote, open every door, answer every phone call, chase every opportunity, because I don't really believe in I set out to do this and that's why I was successful. I think 90% of success is accidental. Accidental in terms of the opportunity arising, not accidental in terms of people's understanding and willingness to take it up. And I know that, I have basically been business agnostic. I probably have been a significant player in 20 different industries. I could have been 40. The standard has always been I don't take on a business that I couldn't run myself if I had to. So we don't design rocket engines, we don't do biotech, but almost everything else falls into the basic, what I call principles of business. And when it's all said and done, it's recognizing opportunities, seeing, that Koyasifin guy. I don't know why I saw him the way I saw him, but my immediate reaction was, this represents a drug risk I'm willing to take, whereas I would never finance a drug company,
right,
or a normal clinical research. I mean, this was financing something where I already knew what the answer was, but I had to prove it in order to get the ticket.
Yeah. And the ticket was a monopoly.
And the ticket was a monopoly. Right. So, I'm a great believer that nobody succeeds unless they really want to buy the ticket. I mean, in the book I tell the story about the Jewish man who was in the white goods business and everything was fine. He was very religious and he went to synagogue every Saturday, and then one day he went to the synagogue, and after prayers he got down on one knee and said, God, business is not as good as it used to be. I'm really in trouble and I need to win the lottery. And the next morning he woke up and opened up the paper and he didn't win. And so the following Saturday he went back to the synagogue, and meanwhile business had gotten significantly worse. And so he finished his prayers, and then he got down on one knee and he said, God, things have really gotten much worse and I'm really in trouble and I need to win the lottery. And the next morning he opened up the newspaper and he didn't win. So on the following Saturday, he's literally spent Friday preparing his Chapter 11 papers, and he tells God of this, and he says, God, I need to win the lottery. And from up on high came a voice, and the voice said, Moshe, you gotta buy a ticket. So, more than anything else, if I were asked to give you all advice, my advice would be buy a ticket. Nobody wins if they don't play. And so you've got to buy a ticket. You've got to be committed, whatever that commitment may represent. I don't have any preferences one way or the other than I've made the fortune that I've made and built the empire that I've made because I've been a professional opportunist. And my advice to everybody is become a professional opportunist. Recognize what the opportunities are and how they may be solved. Recognize the fact that you're not always right. As a matter of fact, you can't succeed unless you understand rejection. So understand it, take your risk, and make it happen, and buy a ticket. Thank you.
Sam, the other thing I'll say is you've made, and you know this, we've talked about it, such an impact at the University of Michigan, in particular the business school, over many years now. And it brings me no greater pride to come back to Chicago, or when I see you on campus and talk about how we are executing that vision that we talked about. But the other thing that I'll add to your advice that I think runs through everything you've done. And I was in San Francisco last week, and I haven't told you this. I had a lunch with some of our alumni out in San Francisco, and a relatively recent alum by the name of Xavier Fuller was at this lunch. And he's in private equity investments. And you were in the Bay Area, and he saw you at a diner or restaurant, and you were eating lunch by yourself. And he went to the restroom, and he's like, I think that's Sam Zell. And so he's Googling, yeah, that's Sam Zell. And so he came out of the restroom and introduced himself to you. And you invited him to sit down and have lunch with you. And he will never forget that. And you have paid forward the impact that this university has had on you in so many ways in helping us build the Zell Lurie Institute and everything we've done for entrepreneurship, being a mentor to many people, and investing in our students in ways that they will never forget. And they'll be the future Sam Zell. So thank you very, very much.
My
And thank
pleasure.
all of you. I'm going to turn it back over to Wendy, but before I do, Sam, I know you have a lot of Michigan paraphernalia, but you also know that I don't travel anywhere without Michigan paraphernalia. So a small token of our immense
Thank you very
appreciation.
much. Hopefully we'll win on Saturday and then it'll be worth it.
There you go. Thank you.